Picture the dark Middle Ages. You, an ordinary citizen, are suddenly accused of heresy and dragged into a damp dungeon. There, the Inquisitors lock you inside an Iron Maiden. The massive doors slowly close, and dozens of rusty iron spikes ruthlessly pierce your body. Sounds like the ultimate nightmare, right? Now, exhale, because not a single person in the Middle Ages ever, under any circumstances, died in this creepy contraption. Your entire knowledge of history is a massive scam sponsored by Hollywood. And right now, I'm going to prove it with 10 examples you've believed to be the absolute truth your entire life. 3 of these facts will completely flip your understanding of the past. And one of them is pure, unadulterated absurdity, yet millions of people worldwide genuinely believe it. You think tough Vikings wore horned helmets? That Napoleon Bonaparte was an angry short guy with an inferiority complex? That gladiators hacked each other to death in the Colosseum just for the Roman emperor's likes? Congratulations, you bought into historical fake news. If even one fact in today's video makes you question your high school diploma, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. Let's go. Part 1. The Iron Maiden, the world's first tourist scam. Let's start with that very monster we talked about at the beginning, the Iron Maiden. Hollywood directors absolutely love shoving this device into every other movie about the Inquisition or Count Dracula. But here's the historical truth. In the Middle Ages, it didn't exist at all. It was the original historical clickbait long before the internet was invented. This monstrosity was invented at the end of the 18th century by greedy European museum curators just to make a quick buck off gullible tourists. In 1793, philosopher Johann Philipp Siebenkees made up a story about a fake execution, purely for the hype, and cunning exhibition owners quickly realized they could cash in on it. They took ordinary old wooden sarcophagi, nailed creepy iron spikes inside them, and told the onlookers, just look at what bloodthirsty savages our ancestors were. That'll be 5 shillings for entry. No photos allowed. And people paid. They were genuinely terrified by a totally fabricated torture device. Next time you see an Iron Maiden in a dark movie, just know, you're looking at a prop from a cheap souvenir shop. By the way, if you think that's the most shameless scam in history, just wait a couple of minutes. A bit later, I'll show you how a single, flawed theatrical production made the whole world believe in the dumbest, most impractical military design in human history. Part 2. Napoleon Bonaparte, a victim of black PR. Meanwhile, let's travel to early 19th century France. Napoleon Bonaparte, a genius military commander, a great emperor, and history's most famous dwarf? In every movie, he's always played by a short actor who is constantly angry, yelling and trying to compensate for his height by conquering Europe. This even gave rise to the official psychological term, the Napoleon complex. But what's the reality? Napoleon was 5'7". For the early 19th century, that was actually slightly above average height. He was physically taller than most of his own French soldiers. Calling an above-average height man a midget for 200 straight years is probably the best and most massive trolling campaign in human history. So where did this myth come from? Simple. British propaganda. When Napoleon began threatening England, brilliant British caricaturist James Gilray systematically started drawing him in newspapers as a tiny, hysterical little man in a giant hat and oversized boots to humiliate the dangerous enemy in the eyes of the public. British newspapers pushed this meme so hard that it outlived the emperor himself by 2 centuries. Plus, there was a mix-up with the metrics. During his autopsy, Napoleon's height was recorded in French inches, which were longer than British ones. The English read the numbers using their own system and gleefully declared, "He really is a gnome." The British literally pulled off the most successful cyberbullying campaign in the era of quill pens.
Part 3. Vikings and Horned Helmets, a fashion verdict. And here is what I promised earlier. Tough Norwegian guys in helmets with huge cow horns. They sail on long ships, drink ale, and look as brutal as possible, right? Now let's just use some logic. In tight, real medieval combat, when warriors stand in a shield wall, a horned helmet like that is just a convenient handle for the enemy to grab in the crush and snap your neck in one motion. No Viking in their right mind would ever wear that onto a battlefield. Real Scandinavian warriors wore smooth iron or leather helmets with a rounded shape. Why? So an enemy's sword or axe would just slide right off the head without doing any damage.
So where did these famous horns come from? The ones they now draw even on hot dog packaging. Say thank you to German composer Richard Wagner. In 1876, for the premiere of his epic opera The Ring of the Nibelung, costume designer Karl Emil Doppler decided that the bad guys on stage needed a bit of dark, mythical terror. He slapped horns on the helmets, purely for visual drama, and that was it. That was enough. The audience loved the look so much that it instantly went viral. One costume designer forever ruined the image of an entire historical era. Just one.
Part 4. Gladiators never died. Moving on. Ancient Rome. The emperor in the stands slowly points his thumb down, and that means death. Thumbs up, and the gladiator is spared. We all know this cruel rule of the Colosseum from every Hollywood sword and sandal epic. But filmmakers constantly forget to mention one tiny economic detail. Gladiators cost an absolutely insane amount of money. Imagine buying a soccer player of Cristiano Ronaldo's caliber today for $200 million, and then you kill him in his very first exhibition match just because the fans in the stands got bored. Sounds like financial idiocy? That's exactly how it sounded to the Romans. Training, feeding, treating, and equipping a professional gladiator was a massive investment.
The owners of gladiator schools, Lanistae, were ruthless businessmen. Not a single one of them would allow their prime investment to be slaughtered in every match. Historical documents prove that the vast majority of fights ended at first serious blood, or with the voluntary surrender of one of the fighters. Gladiators had the best ancient doctors, strict dietitians, and they ate barley and beans to build up a special layer of fat to protect their nerves from cuts. They were the superstars of antiquity, even doing pre-fight endorsements for local olive oil. This wasn't a bloody, no-rules Mortal Kombat. It was high-budget ancient WWE wrestling with top-tier PR management.
Part 5. Pirates didn't bury treasures. Now let's talk about pirates. If you suddenly found yourself with a heavy chest full of golden doubloons, what would you do? Go to the nearest bar? Buy your own ship? Start a luxurious new life? Or would you sail to a cursed, deserted island, dig a deep hole in the sand, hide all your cash there, draw a complicated, confusing map with a red X, shove it into an empty rum bottle, and leave it floating in the ocean so you could peacefully die of scurvy and utter poverty?
In the entire history of piracy, there is only one documented case where Captain William Kidd actually buried some of his loot on Long Island. And that was only because he was trying to hide the money from the authorities before turning himself in to the governor. Spoiler alert, it didn't help. They hanged him anyway. Regular pirates lived for the day. They plundered merchant ships so they could immediately blow all their loot on rum, women, and gambling in the nearest pirate port. The myth of buried pirate treasure and maps was almost entirely invented by author Robert Louis Stevenson in his novel Treasure Island. Hollywood happily grabbed this fiction and made 1,000 identical movies out of it.
Parts 6 through 9. Blitz Smash. Accelerated block. Now, pay attention. We're moving into a blitz format. 4 historical facts you absolutely believed your whole life, but they fall to pieces in exactly 10 seconds. Let's go. Think the Salem witches were brutally burned at the stake? No. And what they actually did to them was way worse. In Puritan America, witches were hanged, and an old man named Giles Corey, who refused to plead guilty, was simply crushed to death by heavy stones. Burning witches was an exclusively European trend. It literally just didn't make it to the New World in time. Are you sure Japanese ninjas always wore tight black pajamas? Then ask yourself this: if you're a secret spy, why would you want to stand out from the crowd as much as possible by running around in a black suit in broad daylight? Real shinobi dressed like regular peasants or monks to blend into the crowd. The black suits are an invention of Japanese kabuki theater, where stagehands dressed in black so they wouldn't be noticed, and later directors turned them into assassins for the shock value.
Did you learn in school that Columbus was trying to prove the Earth was round? Forget it. In 1492, absolutely every educated person in Europe perfectly knew the Earth was a sphere. Scientists argued with Columbus not about the shape of the planet, but about its size. And the scientists were right, while Columbus drastically messed up his calculations. He was just incredibly lucky that America happened to be in the way. Otherwise, his entire crew would have guaranteed starved to death in the middle of the ocean. And finally, the classic Western, the Wild West. Endless shootouts right at high noon? Nonsense. In famous Tombstone, the legendary cowboy town, gun laws were stricter than they are in New York today. Upon entering the town, you were legally required to hand over your revolver to the sheriff. There were way fewer murders in these dusty little towns than in a modern suburban neighborhood.
Well, is your historical worldview cracking yet? Hold on tight, because we've reached the dessert. Hollywood's greatest and most dramatic myth, the legendary Battle of Thermopylae.
This is Sparta!
What do the movies usually show us? 300 incredibly sweaty, jacked men with perfect six-packs, wearing nothing but leather Speedos and red capes, heroically fighting to the death against a million-man Persian army. It's them alone against the world. Pure heroism. Now let's look at the historical reality that will forever destroy your sacred faith in historical blockbusters. First, let's talk about the wardrobe. Spartans weren't idiots, and they didn't fight half naked. They were heavy infantry. They had heavy bronze armor, greaves, and massive shields weighing over 20 pounds. Going into tight, close-quarters combat against thousands of arrows wearing nothing but a Speedo isn't a badass tactic. It's guaranteed suicide in the first 5 seconds of battle. But the most important part, there were not 300 of them. Standing shoulder to shoulder with the Spartans in the Pass of Thermopylae were 7,000 to 9,000 other Greeks. There were Thespians, Thebans, Arcadians. Yes, the 300 Spartans were indeed the elite vanguard, but by no means were they there alone. When the Persians found the flanking trail, King Leonidas did indeed let part of the army go. But even then, it wasn't just the Spartans who stayed behind. Around 700 soldiers from the city of Thespiae and about 400 Thebans voluntarily stayed behind with them. Over 1,000 men fought to the death exactly like the Spartans did. But Hollywood producers decided that a movie titled 1,400 Heavily Armored Greeks Against the Persians didn't sound epic enough and wouldn't sell tickets. So all the other heroes were cynically cut out of history just for the sake of a cool movie poster. History proves one very simple thing. Reality isn't more boring than the movies. Reality is much scarier, it's more uncomfortable, and it constantly breaks our cozy worldview. It proves that we are ready to blindly believe anything, from horned helmets to buried chests of gold, as long as it's presented dramatically with the right soundtrack. Hollywood doesn't care about real facts. They only want your emotions and box office revenue. And now that you know the truth, watching most so-called historical movies is going to be physically painful for you. 99% of the people on this planet still blindly believe these fairy tales. You just entered the 1% of those who know the actual truth. So which historical fake from today's video disappointed or surprised you the most? Drop down into the comments right now and prove your diploma isn't made of cardboard. Let's discuss. And while you're typing your answer, subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, in your next life, karma will play a cruel joke on you, and you'll be reincarnated as a gladiator who forgot to sign an olive oil sponsorship contract. See you in the next video.